Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to get past the noise, digging into sources to pull out the insights you really need. We give you that shortcut to being well-informed.
And today, we are really diving deep into some fascinating excerpts from Freakonomics. This book by Levitt, the Economist, and Dubner, the writer. Well, it's not your standard econ textbook.
Not at all. It uses economic thinking, these tools, to ask some really, really unconventional questions. Gets into the hidden side of, well, pretty much everything.
Exactly. We're going to tackle some strange riddles like, why do drug dealers sometimes still live with their moms?
Right, or what's really going on when a real estate agent calls a house well-maintained.
Mm-hmm. Which is actually more dangerous for a kid, a gun in the house or a swimming pool in the backyard.
And even exploring what your name might maybe signal about your future. It sounds a bit out there.
It does, but the analysis is grounded in data. This is all about challenging that conventional wisdom we all kind of absorb.
Prepare for some surprises, maybe a few aha moments. We're going to look at how the world really operates, according to Levitt and Dubner.
So let's start with the approach itself. Levitt's whole deal. He sees economics as having these amazing tools.
But maybe not enough interesting questions.
Precisely. He thinks economists often focus on, the big market stuff, money, finance.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
Right. But his gift is asking different questions, applying those tools to everyday life, things you wouldn't normally think of as economics.
Yeah, the book mentions he has these elite credentials, but he's not trying to predict the stock market or anything.
No, he apparently says that would be total fakery. He's much more interested in the stuff and riddles of everyday life.
Okay, so this Freakonomics lens, it boils down to a few core ideas, right? A new way of looking at things.
Yeah, about 5 main ones. The first, and maybe the biggest, is about incentives.
Incentives. The cornerstone of modern life, they call it.
Like a bullet, a lever, a key. They argue incentives have this just astonishing power to change how people behave. We respond to economic ones, sure, but also moral and social ones.
Okay, give us an example. The Israeli daycare one.
Perfect example. So you have parents picking up kids late from daycare. Annoying for the staff.
Makes sense. So they introduced a fine. Seems logical.
Totally logical on the surface.
Yeah.
Introduce a small fine, maybe $3, for late pickups. What do you think happened?
Well, I guess fewer parents were late.
You'd think, but late pickups doubled.
Doubled? How?
Well, before the fine, parents felt guilty being late. That's a moral incentive. But the $3 fine basically put a price on lateness. It replaced the guilt, that powerful moral feeling, with a cheap economic cost. Suddenly, being late wasn't a moral failing. It was just something you could buy for $3.
Wow. So the economic incentive actually crowded out the moral one. That's wild.
It really is. And you see something similar with blood donations.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Offering a small payment for donating blood sometimes led to less blood being donated.
Less. Why?
It turned this noble altruistic act, something you do for the good of others, into, well, a kind of unpleasant, low-paying job. And for many people, it just wasn't worth the hassle or the discomfort for a tiny bit of cash.
It really makes you question how we design incentives, doesn't it? In policies, in business, even just trying to get our kids to do chores.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which leads right into the second big idea. Conventional wisdom is often wrong, or at least very flimsy.
Right. It's often just convenient or makes us feel good.
Exactly. It's hard to see through because it feels comfortable. Like the idea that the booming economy in the 90s was the only reason crime went down.
Or that just spending more money automatically wins elections.
Yeah, the book argues we see correlations, two things happening together, and we jump to causation without really digging deeper.
Okay, so incentives rule, conventional wisdom is shaky. What's next?
Third, dramatic effects often have distant, maybe even subtle causes. The obvious answer isn't always the right one. Things are often more complex.
Which connects to the fourth point about experts.
Experts often use their informational advantage, knowing more than you, to serve their own agenda.
Leveraging fear, maybe? Like the book mentions doctors or funeral directors.
Precisely. But the good news, maybe, is that the internet is shrinking that advantage. It gives us access to information, comparing prices for things like coffins or life insurance.
So information is power, and the internet is distributing it more widely.
Definitely. And that brings us to the fifth core idea. Knowing what to measure and how makes a complex world a bit less so. The sheer power of numbers can cut through the confusion.
Okay, so those are the tools. Let's apply them. Information asymmetry, that gap between what one person knows and another doesn't.
It's a powerful concept. Think
Yep.
about the Ku Klux Klan. After the Civil War, it grew into this big, terrifying organization.
And its power was based on secrecy, right? All those weird titles, the Clorin.
Exactly. The Clyliph, Clara, Exalted Cyclops, all that stuff. It created this mystique, this fear based on the unknown. But then came Stetson Kennedy.
The guy who went undercover.
Yeah. He infiltrated the KKK, wrote down all their secrets, their rituals, even their sales pitches.
And those pitches were pretty raw. The source quotes one. Do you hate niggers? Do you hate Jews? Do you have $10? Really lays bare to hate.
Absolutely chilling. But Kennedy didn't just document it. He did something brilliant. He fed the information to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show.
Superman, the comic book hero.
The very same. On the radio show, Superman started fighting the Klan. He exposed their secret handshakes, their passwords, their rituals to millions of listeners, including kids.
So he turned their secrets into a joke.
Pretty much. It turned their precious knowledge into ammunition for mockery. It demystified them, took away the fear of the unknown. The book calls it maybe the most effective tactic against the Klan's potential revival after the war. Information stripped them of their power.
That's incredible, using pop culture to fight hate. And speaking of data challenging assumptions, the book looks at lynching statistics too, right?
It does, and it's definitely complex. While lynchings were horrific acts of terror, the data shows the total number actually went down over time.
Even when the Klan was at its peak in the 1920s.
Surprisingly, yes. There were fewer lynchings in the 1920s when the Klan had millions of members than back in the early 1900s when it was mostly dormant.
So why? What's the explanation given?
The argument presented is that the earlier, more frequent lynchings had already established this incredibly brutal incentive system for controlling behavior through terror. It's a really dark application of incentive theory.
And the book also puts it in context, comparing it to other causes of death.
Right. It points out that while every lynching was a tragedy, they were statistically rare compared to, say, black infant mortality. Around 28 people lynched in the entire decade of the 1920s versus something like 20,000 black infants dying each year around 1920 from things like malnutrition and disease. It forces a different perspective on the scale of different tragedies.
So information, or the lack of it, is a massive factor. We see that with real estate agents too.
Definitely. There's a built-in conflict of interest. The book cites data from Chicago home sales, thousands of them.
And what did it show?
It showed that agents, when selling their own houses, keep them on the market longer, about 10 days longer on average.
And they get more money for their own houses?
Yep, an extra 3+%. On a $300,000 house, that's like $10,000 more.
Why the difference?
Well, think about their commission. On your house, if they get you an extra $10,000, their slice of that might only be $150 or so.
Not a huge motivator to wait longer or negotiate harder.
Exactly. For them, getting the deal done quickly is often more valuable than getting you the absolute top dollar. But for their own house, they'll happily wait for that extra $10,000.
And they use language to kind of nudge things along too, that well-maintained example.
Right. To an agent, well-maintained is basically code for it's old, but it hasn't collapsed yet. But to you, the seller, it sounds like a compliment. It manages your expectations downwards.
It's all about controlling the information flow.
But again, the internet helps here. Just like it helped expose Klan secrets, accessible online data on home prices, insurance rates, even casket prices. It reduces that expert advantage.
Information asymmetry pops up in personal stuff too, like online dating.
Oh, absolutely. The book talks about the fabulous phenomenon. People stretch the truth a lot.
Like with looks.
Definitely. Something like 70% of women and 67% of men on dating sites claim above average looks. Many even say very good looks, which leaves almost nobody admitting to being average or below average.
Statistically impossible, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
People are, as the book puts it, resistant to the meaning of average. And it's not just looks. Way more women claim to be blonde online than the national average suggests.
So putting aside the fibbing, what actually works? What gets responses?
The data shows some patterns. Men looking for serious relationships seem to do better. Women looking for casual relationships also get responses.
And the classic stereotypes hold up. Men want looks, women want income.
Pretty much, according to the data they analyzed. Although, interestingly, a woman earning too much can apparently scare some men off.
Huh. Any surprises in job preferences?
Maybe. Men seem drawn to students, artists, musicians, vets, even celebrities. They tend to avoid secretaries or people in certain other professions. It paints a specific picture.
So from secrets and sales pitches to dating profiles, Information and incentives are everywhere, and that includes cheating.
Yeah, the book frames cheating as this fundamental economic act getting more for less, and it happens in places you might not expect.
Like teachers cheating on standardized tests. How does that even work?
Well, think about the pressure. Laws like No Child Left Behind tied school funding and teacher evaluations to test scores. In Chicago, they even eliminated social promotion, passing kids to the next grade, regardless of scores.
So suddenly, teachers had a huge incentive to make sure their students scored well.
A massive incentive. And some teachers, facing that pressure, cheated. Researchers figured out how to spot it using data analysis.
How? What did they look for?
Unusual patterns in the answer sheets. Like a whole bunch of students suddenly getting the same string of difficult questions right. Or maybe acing the hard questions but bombing the easy ones.
Things that just don't happen randomly.
Exactly. Or a classroom showing a massive jump in scores one year, then falling way back the next year after maybe that teacher leaves. The algorithm flagged these anomalies.
Who was doing the cheating?
Now,
Any patterns there?
it wasn't just one type. Male-female teachers, equally likely. They tended to be younger, maybe less qualified. And cheating spiked right after the incentive structure changed in Chicago in '96. Unsurprisingly, teachers in the lowest scoring classrooms felt the most pressure and were most likely to cheat.
But it's so counterproductive for the kids.
That's the really cool part. The teacher might think they're helping the student get promoted, but that student then gets to the next grade completely unprepared. They haven't learned the material. They're set up to fail.
So the cheating was really about the teacher meeting their incentives, not helping the student long term.
Largely, yes. The good news is, when Chicago public schools used this algorithm, even though they could only fire about a dozen teachers where the evidence was ironclad, the rate of cheating dropped by over 30% the next year.
Just the threat of being caught changed the behavior, the incentive shifted again.
Exactly. And the algorithm wasn't just finding cheaters, it also helped identify genuinely excellent teachers whose students showed consistent, believable gains.
Okay, from classrooms to sumo wrestling. Is that rigged too?
Well, the data is highly suggestive. Think about the setup in a big sumo tournament. Wrestlers need a certain number of wins, usually 8 out of 15 matches, to maintain their rank and salary.
Okay.
So imagine it's the last day. You have a wrestler who's 7-7. He needs this win desperately. His opponent is maybe 8-6. He's already safe. He's got his winning record.
So the 7-7 guy has way more riding on the match.
Immensely more. And what does the data show? The 7-7 wrestler wins against the 8-6 wrestler about 80% of the time on that final day.
80%. That sounds suspiciously high if it's a fair fight.
Extremely high. Statistically, you'd expect something closer to 50%. It strongly suggests the 8-6 wrestler might be letting the 7-7 wrestler win, perhaps with an understanding of a payback later.
But how can you be sure?
Here's the clincher. When allegations of match fixing hit the Japanese media, guess what happened in the very next tournaments?
Let me guess. The win rate changed.
Dramatically. In those tournaments, under intense media scrutiny, the 7-7 wrestlers suddenly only won about 50% of the time against the 8-6 guys. Right back to what you'd expect by chance.
Wow. The spotlight changed the incentives again. Hard to argue with that.
Very hard. It strongly suggests that, yeah, sumo is likely involved rigged matches.
Okay, one more cheating example. The bagel man. This sounds less dramatic.
It is, but it's fascinating. This guy, Paul Feldman, used to deliver bagels and donuts to offices. He'd just leave them with a cash box and rely on the honor system for payment.
An accidental honesty experiment.
Exactly. And he kept meticulous records for years. He knew exactly how many bagels were taken and how much money was left. He could measure honesty precisely.
What did he find? Are people generally honest?
Generally, yeah. The overall payment rate was pretty high, around 87%. But here's the interesting part.
Go on.
He noticed that the same offices, the same people, who consistently shorted him maybe taking bagels worth $10, but only leaving $9, almost never stole the entire cash box.
Huh. So they cheat him a little bit, but wouldn't commit outright theft of the money.
Right. It suggests people draw these fine lines in their own minds about what constitutes real stealing versus, fudging things a bit. Taking a bagel feels different than taking cash, even if the value is the same. It's a subtle insight into everyday ethics.
Okay, these examples really hammer home how incentives drive behavior, often in unexpected ways. Let's use this lens to revisit some really big conventional wisdom topics, like the huge crime drop in the 1990s.
Yeah, this is a big one in the book. Everyone remembers crime was falling fast in the 90s, but the common explanations, they don't always hold up under Levitt's analysis.
Like the booming economy. That seemed obvious at the time.
It did. But the book argues the link isn't as strong as people think. Crime rates sometimes fall when the economy is bad and rise when it's good. Correlation isn't causation.
What about increased incarceration? Putting more people in prison?
That definitely played a role, taking criminals off the streets. But Levitt's analysis suggests it doesn't explain the sheer scale and speed of the drop. Other factors were more significant drivers of that specific decline.
Gun control laws, like the Brady Act.
The analysis found them practically impotent. Why? Because criminals don't usually buy guns through legal channels anyway. There was a thriving black market. And cities with strict local gun bans like D.C. and Chicago didn't see crime fall earlier or faster than other cities.
Okay, what about policing? Like the broken window strategy in New York City under Giuliani and Bratton, that got a ton of credit.
It did. But the data shows crime in NYC started falling before those specific policies were fully implemented. And the decline continued long after Bratton left. So while policing mattered, the book argues those specific strategies weren't the main driver of the massive nationwide drop.
Even the death penalty. Executions went up in the 90s.
They quadrupled, yeah. But they were still incredibly rare, fewer than 500 executions in the whole decade. And they happened years after the crime. The analysis suggests it was too infrequent and too delayed to be a significant deterrent.
Plus, that chilling comparison being on death row was statistically safer than being in a crack gang.
Right, a 2% annual death rate on death row versus a 7% chance of dying per year for a crack gang foot soldier. Yeah. It puts the deterrent effect in perspective.
So if it wasn't the economy, prisons, guns, policing, or executions as the main drivers, what was it, according to Freakonomics?
Two major and somewhat unexpected factors are highlighted. First, the bursting of the crack cocaine bubble.
How did that reduce crime?
Well, the crack market in the late 80s and early 90s was incredibly violent. But it was also structured like a tournament. Huge rewards for those at the top, but incredible danger for the guys on the street corners. That 7% death rate. As the market got saturated, profits for the low-level dealers shrank. At the same time, many older, established dealers were killed or imprisoned. Younger guys looked at the shrinking rewards and the still huge risks and decided it just wasn't worth it anymore. The allure faded.
So less competition for drug turf meant less violence.
Exactly. Violence associated with the crack trade plummeted. Homicide rates for young black men who were disproportionately involved in the crack trade fell almost 50% between 91 and 2001, much faster than for other groups. The book estimates this accounted for about 15% of the overall crime drop.
Okay, that's one factor. What was the other, even bigger one?
This is probably the most controversial claim in the book: the legalization of abortion following Roe v. Wade in 1973.
Abortion. How could that affect crime rates 20 years later?
It's presented as a delayed demographic effect. The argument is based on the idea that unwanted children, on average, tend to have more difficult upbringings and are statistically more likely to become criminals later in life.
Okay, where's the evidence for that link?
The book cites several pieces. One is the example of Romania under Ceausescu, who banned abortion in 1966. The cohort of children born immediately after the ban, many presumably unwanted, had significantly higher crime rates years later compared to cohorts born just before. Similar patterns were found in other countries where abortion access changed.
So the theory is Roe v. Wade prevented the births of many children who would have been at higher risk of becoming criminals.
That's the core argument. Legalized abortion led to fewer unwanted births. The first generation born after Roe v. Wade, who might have otherwise been disproportionately likely to enter crime, reached their peak crime-prone years, late teens, early 20s, in the early 1990s.
Just when crime started to fall dramatically.
Precisely. The timing lines up. Furthermore, states that had higher abortion rates in the 1970s experienced steeper crime drops in the 1990s, even after controlling for lots of other factors like poverty, policing, etc.
And this link only appeared after that generation came of age.
Right. There was no correlation between abortion rates and crime rates before the late 1980s. It suggests this cohort effect was real.
It's definitely a provocative argument. The book includes that inefficient economist's calculation too, right? Comparing lives saved from abortion to lives lost to homicide.
It does. It's a stark calculation, meant to illustrate the cold logic of economic trade-offs, not make a moral judgment. It basically asks, if you assign a certain value to a fetus versus a born infant, how does the life cost of abortion compare to the lives saved by reduced homicide? It forces you to confront the numbers detached from emotion.
It definitely challenges how we think about cause and effect over long timescales. Let's shift gears to another area full of conventional wisdom: parenting.
Ah, yes, the quest for the perfect parent. The book argues parents are often driven by fear, amplified by experts, and we're generally terrible at assessing real risks.
We worry about the wrong things, like mad cow disease.
Exactly. We panic about rare, scary-sounding risks, but ignore common ones that feel familiar, like, say, food poisoning risks in our own kitchen.
And the gun versus swimming pool comparison really drives that home.
It does. Statistically, a child is far more likely to drown in a backyard pool than to be killed in a gun accident at home. About 100 times more likely, the book states. Water is just much more dangerous than we tend to think.
So, beyond risk assessment, what does the data say about what actually influences a child's success? Nature versus nurture.
Decades of research, especially twin studies, suggest genetics play a huge role. Maybe 50% of personality and ability. Nurture matters, but it's not the whole story.
And that Chicago school choice lottery study seemed to back this up. Sending kids to better schools didn't make a difference academically.
Surprisingly, no. The kids who won a lottery and went to supposedly better schools performed no better on tests than statistically identical kids who lost the lottery and stayed in their original schools. It suggests the school itself, within a certain range, might matter less than the child's innate abilities and home environment.
So what does correlate with kids doing well on tests, according to the big ECLS study data?
Okay, things that are correlated with higher test scores. Having highly educated parents, high socioeconomic status, the mother being 30 or older at first birth, English being spoken at home.
Wait, also not being adopted? That seems counterintuitive.
Right. Adopted kids tend to test lower than their adoptive parents might predict, suggesting that genetic influence from their birth parents often outweighs the environmental advantages of the adoptive home, at least on these standardized tests. Also correlated, parents involved in the PTA, and lots of books in the home.
Okay, now what about the things parents often obsess over that don't seem to correlate with test scores?
This list is surprising, too. Things not correlated. Whether the mom worked before kindergarten, attending Head Start.
Head Start, really?
The analysis presented in the book found it repeatedly ineffectual, suggesting low teacher pay might be a factor. Also not correlated. Being regularly read to by parents, going to museums frequently, being spanked, or watching a lot of TV.
Reading to your kids doesn't correlate with test scores. That seems unbelievable.
It's important to clarify correlation versus causation. It doesn't mean reading is bad. It just means that in this data set, controlling for other factors like parents' education and income, the act of reading itself didn't show an independent statistical link to test scores. The parents who read to their kids are often the highly educated, high-income parents already captured by those other variables. Ah, I see. It's what the parents are, educated, involved more than specific actions they do. Reading every night, museum trips.
That seems to be the implication for test scores, yes. And significantly, the analysis suggests the black-white test score gap nearly disappears when you control for socioeconomic factors like parental income, education, and mother's age at first birth.
So it's much more about socioeconomic background than race itself.
That's what this data strongly indicates. However, there's a nuance with adoption. While adoptive parents' advantages didn't boost test scores much, those adopted kids were much more likely to go to college, get good jobs, and marry later compared to similar kids not adopted. So the parenting did matter for long-term life outcomes, just not necessarily for standardized test performance in school.
Exactly. The influence showed up later, in different ways.
Okay, let's talk names. The book suggests names are more than just labels.
Yeah, they're seen as signals reflecting parents' aspirations and backgrounds. There's this virtual segregation in culture, even down to names. Black and white parents often choose very different names.
Like the lists of blackest and whitest names, Deshaun versus Jake.
Right. And this leads to the debate about whether black-sounding names cause economic harm. Audit studies sending out identical resumes with only the name changed sometimes show fewer callbacks for names like Deshaun compared to Jake.
But is it the name itself causing discrimination? Or is the name just a marker for socioeconomic background, which is the real factor?
That's the tricky question. The data can't fully untangle. Does the name trigger bias, or does it simply signal a background, low income, low education, that faces economic hurdles anyway? Probably a bit of both.
But names definitely reflect parental background and hopes, the Harvard and Yale examples.
For sure. The data showed names like Harvard and Princeton were given almost exclusively to black children in California, while Yale was all white. It suggests different aspirational targets. And you see a clear link between parents' education level and name choice high-end names like Alexandra versus low-end names like Amber.
And those More creative examples, shithead and orange jello.
Yes, pronounced shatid and aranzello. Extreme examples, but they illustrate parents trying to choose something unique, sometimes with unfortunate results. Names or data points about the parents.
Which brings us back full circle to that first riddle. Why do drug dealers often live with their moms? They're in this dangerous game. Shouldn't they be rich?
Well, most aren't. The book paints crack dealing as incredibly dangerous, that 7% annual death rate for foot soldiers, but with very low pay, like $3.30 an hour on average.
So why do it?
It's the tournament model again, like trying to become a movie star or an NFL player. The odds are terrible, but the potential prize at the very top is huge.
Big money, power, glory for the few game leaders.
Exactly. Leaders might make $100,000 a year. Top bosses, maybe $500,000, although a good chunk of them end up in prison. For kids in poor neighborhoods with few legitimate opportunities.
Like those Chicago housing projects mentioned.
Right. High poverty, single-parent homes, few jobs. Crack dealing could look like the best available option, the only path to potential riches, even if the odds are slim and the risks immense. Many foot soldiers had modest aspirations, like wanting to be a janitor.
It's the basic law of supply and demand for labor, isn't it? Lots of people willing to do a dangerous low-level job means the pay stays low.
Precisely. Which leads to that interesting comparison the book makes. Prostitute versus architect.
Why does a prostitute often earn more than an architect?
Pure economics, stripping away moral judgment. Fewer people are willing and able to be prostitutes, smaller supply. The job involves specific skills, unpleasant conditions, high risks, violence, disease, and instability. Yet demand is high. Architects have a larger supply of qualified people, less risk, more stability. So wages are lower.
It's just supply, demand, and compensating differentials for risk and unpleasantness.
Exactly. And the rise of crack dealing itself was partly an economic phenomenon. The invention of crack coincided with a glut of cocaine from Colombia, making it cheap.
And the high was intense but short-lived, creating repeat customers.
Yes, instant demand. Street gangs already controlled territory, so they pivoted into becoming these drug-selling enterprises. Figures like Oscar Danilo Blandin acted like distribution pioneers, spreading it rapidly.
And the crime associated with it wasn't usually users robbing people.
Primarily, no. The huge spike in violence was mostly dealers fighting each other over territory and market share. Internal industry violence, essentially.
So wrapping this all up, looking at the world through this Freakonomics lens, it's really about questioning assumptions, isn't it?
It really is. It's about understanding that incentives drive almost everything, that conventional wisdom is often just lazy thinking, and that data, if you look hard enough and ask the right questions, can reveal the hidden connections.
It shows how subtle, distant causes can have huge effects, like with abortion and crime, and how experts can use information, or the lack of it, to their advantage.
Whether it's teachers, sumo wrestlers, real estate agents, or even parents trying to figure out risks.
Yeah.
The principles apply across the board.
So maybe the takeaway for you listening is, next time you hear something everyone knows is true, or you encounter some everyday puzzle, pause, ask, what are the incentives here? Is there hidden information? Could the real cause be something completely unexpected?
It's a powerful way to think. But it also raises a final, kind of humbling question. We've talked a lot about data and predictable patterns based on incentives and a background.
But what about just randomness? Luck? The unpredictable stuff.
Exactly. The book touches on this too, that even with the best, most informed parenting, there's still this huge random effect that rains down on a child's life. Success can happen despite terrible parenting and failure despite the best efforts.
So how do we square that? The power of data and economic analysis to explain so much versus the undeniable randomness and sheer unpredictability of individual lives. Where does one end and the other begin?
That's maybe the ultimate riddle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something to chew on.